The grandfather clock in James Carter's penthouse office struck 2 in the morning, its deep chimes echoing like the toll of a funeral bell in the stillness. The 45th floor of the towering skyscraper in downtown Chicago, where Carter & Company, the leading marketing firm, was headquartered, offered a panoramic view of the city's shimmering lights. But James, the 45-year-old white man with salt and pepper hair and deep blue eyes, had no mind to admire the view. He sat hunched over on the mahogany desk, his trembling hands gripping a yellowed ultrasound photo, the only piece of evidence of a family he had destroyed over 2 decades ago. In the faded image, 2 tiny figures emerged like promises that James had been too cowardly to keep. Baby A and Baby B, the ultrasound technician, had called them. Angela Brooks, his former lover, had whispered through tears of happiness. Ethan and Zoe, James, our children. Now those names were like blades cutting into his heart. James shut his eyes, trying to banish the memory of Angela's warm brown eyes and radiant smile as she held the ultrasound picture close to her chest. "We'll be a family, James. A real family," she had said. But he had not believed in it, not brave enough to believe. "My God, what have I done?" James murmured, his voice breaking in the space. There was no answer, only the echo of silence, like the prayers for forgiveness he had whispered over the past 22 years. Beside the ultrasound picture lay a worn leather file containing all the evidence of his greatest mistake. The hospital bracelet from the day the twins were born, their birth certificates with his name as the father, and dozens of letters from Angela, each one an increasingly desperate plea. "James, come home. I still love you. The kids need you." He had stopped reading them after the first year, unable to bear the truth that he had abandoned the woman who loved him most and 2 innocent children. James Carter was the epitome of success. Carter & Company had become the leading marketing company in America, specializing in creating campaigns promoting the perfect family image, a bitter irony. Each Father's Day campaign, every advertisement about the journey home, was like a knife to his heart. He had built his empire on values he had betrayed: billion-dollar assets, prestigious awards hanging on the walls, and business accolades could not fill the void in his soul. He was a ghost, living among false glories. Tonight, the pain was sharper than ever. Today was Ethan and Zoe's 22nd birthday, a milestone he had no right to celebrate, but could not ignore. As he did every year, James quietly donated to children's charities, and checks were written on the amount he would have spent on birthday parties, Christmas gifts, and college tuition. But money could not buy forgiveness. Nothing could erase the fact that he had abandoned Angela, a 23-year-old black woman, when she had needed him the most. James remembered Angela like a flame. She was a brilliant, innovative, resilient, and passionate student at the University of Chicago. Their love was fiery, but also full of challenges. The Carter family, with its conservative views and racial prejudices, did not accept Angela. His mother, Eleanor, had coldly said, "You can't marry a girl like that, James. She'll ruin your future." His father, a wealthy lawyer, had warned about the scandal of associating with a black woman. Those words had lodged deep in James's mind, sowing seeds of doubt about his ability to protect Angela and their children from society's judgment. When Angela became pregnant, her joy melted James's heart, and terror filled him. He knew nothing about fatherhood. His father, a harsh man, expressed affection only through disappointed looks and impossible expectations. His mother was lost in tranquilizers and lavish parties. The Carter family had money but no love. Eleanor said, "You're not ready for this," when James told her about the pregnancy. "She trapped you. You'll destroy those kids, just like your father destroyed you." Those words haunted him as he held Ethan and Zoe in his arms. their tiny fingers wrapping around his. His love was so intense it was almost dangerous, as though one wrong move could bring the world crashing down. And so, he made the biggest mistake of all. He left. He left Northwestern Memorial Hospital on a cold March afternoon, leaving Angela alone with 2 newborns. He told himself she would be better off without him, that he was protecting them from his incompetence. But deep down, James knew he was running from his fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear that he wasn't good enough to be the father of 2 black children in a world full of prejudice. James stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the sleeping city of Chicago. Somewhere out there, Angela was living a brilliant life without him. She had earned her MBA, built her career, and raised 2 incredible children who likely didn't even know his name. He hoped Angela hated him. That would be easier than knowing she had ever spent even a moment remembering the man who had shattered her faith in love. His phone buzzed with a message from his assistant, Sarah Mitchell. "Don't forget the orientation meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. for the new creative director and interns. They're amazing." James almost laughed at the word amazing. Nothing could change him. He was a broken man, disguised by an expensive suit and a polished smile. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass, letting the tears blur the city lights. He didn't know that tomorrow would be unlike any day before. Tomorrow, fate would force him to face his life's greatest love and most profound regret. Tomorrow, Angela Brooks would step back into his life, bringing with her the children he had abandoned and a heart full of plans for revenge that had been simmering for 22 years. James Carter stood before the window of his office, the lights of Chicago reflected in his deep blue eyes. But his mind drifted back 22 years to a time when his life was still a vibrant canvas untouched by regret. He closed his eyes, letting memories of Angela Brooks flood in like a tide, sweet and painful all at once. Angela, with her bouncy curls and that smile that lit up a room, had once been the center of his world. They met at the University of Chicago, both young students fueled by ambition and dreams. In 2001, James was a 23-year-old white man, the only son of the Carter family, a wealthy but conservative clan from the suburb of Winnetka. Angela, a brilliant black woman studying economics, consistently topped her class with bold ideas and remarkable resolve. They met during a group debate on marketing strategy, where Angela challenged all of James's views with sharp arguments and blazing passion. He was immediately captivated by her intellect and how she stood her ground under the scrutiny of a classroom filled mostly with white students. "You don't understand the community, Carter," she once said with a half-playful smile, "but I'll teach you." Their love ignited like a wildfire. Late nights in the library, walks along Lake Michigan, heated discussions about the future. These became the fragments of a shared dream. Angela dreamed of a consultancy to help small black-owned businesses thrive. James wanted to build a marketing empire. But more than that, he wanted to create a life with Angela. "We're going to make something big, James," she once said, her brown eyes glowing with hope. "Together, we're unstoppable." But dreams do not exist in a vacuum. The Carter family, steeped in racial prejudice, saw Angela as a threat. His father, a prominent lawyer, Robert Carter, referred to her as James's mistake. His mother, Eleanor, coldly warned, "Son, you can't marry a black girl. Society won't accept it. You'll be isolated, and your career will disappear." James fought back, but those words planted doubt. He began noticing the stares when they were out together, the whispers at family gatherings, and the suffocating pressure of a society still fractured by race. When Angela told him she was pregnant, her joy melted James's heart. She hugged him, laughing through tears of happiness. "We're going to be a family, James. Ethan and Zoe. I've already picked the names. What do you think? He nodded and held her tight, but deep inside, fear began to creep in. He knew nothing about fatherhood. His father was distant, always preoccupied with work and harsh expectations. His mother, once a gifted artist, had given up her dreams to become a high-society wife, drowning in wine and tranquilizers. The Carter family had wealth, but lacked love, a legacy James feared he might pass on to his children. The pressure mounted when he brought Angela home to meet his family. Dinner at the Carter estate was a disaster. Robert looked at Angela with barely veiled contempt, while Eleanor said, "You don't belong here, dear, and neither will your children." Angela smiled politely, but James felt her grip his hand tighter under the table. After that night, he began questioning whether he was strong enough to shield Angela and their children from his family's judgment and society's scorn. "She trapped you," Eleanor said, when it was just the two of them. "You'll ruin those children the way your father ruined me." Those words haunted James throughout Angela's pregnancy. She remained radiant, preparing for the twins with tireless excitement. She sewed curtains for the nursery, picked out children's books, and dreamed of family holidays. But for James, each day was a battle against fear. He feared he couldn't be a good father, feared prejudice would hurt Angela and the babies, and feared that love wouldn't be enough to withstand it all. When Angela gave birth to the twins at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, James was there, his heart exploding as he held Ethan and Zoe. They were tiny, perfect, with warm brown skin from their mother and his blue eyes. But that moment also gripped him with paralyzing fear. Ethan's little fingers wrapped around his, and Zoe's gaze seemed to peer into his soul, and he felt unworthy. James stood at her bedside the day Angela was discharged, watching her cradle the twins with fierce love. "We're going to be okay, James," she whispered, "as long as we're together." But he couldn't stay. The fear of failure, of societal judgment, and his mother's voice echoing, "You'll ruin them," crushed him. He kissed Angela on the forehead, whispered an apology, and walked away, leaving her with two newborns and a shattered heart. He told himself Angela would be stronger without him, and that he was protecting them from his inadequacy. But deep down, James knew he was running away. The memory faded, pulling James back to the present. He opened the leather folder and unfolded a letter from Angela, written 3 months after he had left. "James, Ethan, and Zoe are growing every day. I see you in Ethan's smile, in Zoe's eyes. I still love you, but the kids need you more. Come home." He never returned. He cut off all contact, moved to a new apartment, and buried himself in work to forget the pain. Carter and Company became his escape, each successful campaign an effort to prove he wasn't a failure. But every night, as darkness settled over Chicago, he faced the truth. He had abandoned the woman he loved and the 2 children who shared his blood. James closed the folder and locked it in the safe as if he could erase the past. But he knew the past never truly slept. He didn't know that tomorrow morning it would return, not as a ghost, but as a storm named Angela Brooks, carrying the children he never deserved to call his own, and a plan for revenge that had been smoldering for 22 years. On Monday morning, the early sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Carter & Company, illuminating the marble hallway leading to Conference Room A. James Carter, in his perfectly tailored navy blue suit, walked with the confident air of a successful CEO. But beneath the polished exterior, his heart raced. The message from his assistant Sarah Mitchell the previous evening still echoed in his mind. Orientation meeting at 9 a.m. with the new creative director and interns. They're excellent. James didn't know that excellent would become the term defining the moment that would change his life forever. Conference Room A was ready, Senior staff members of Carter and Company were gathered around the long wooden table, chatting eagerly about new projects. Sarah, with her professional smile, was organizing documents. James entered, nodding at everyone. But his gaze stopped at the three figures standing near the window, their backs to him. A woman with a commanding posture, straight shoulders, and carefully trimmed curly hair. Beside her were two young people, a man and a woman, exuding confidence and energy. There was something familiar in the way the woman tilted her head, in her graceful movements, that made James's chest tighten. "Mr. Carter," Sarah's voice came through the intercom. "We're ready to begin." James nodded, but his hand gripped the doorknob tightly, as if clinging to reality. He took a deep breath, walked into the room, and then time seemed to stop. The woman turned around, and the universe seemed to hold its breath. Angela Brooks stood before him like a dream summoned from his deepest memories. She was more beautiful than his recollections, sharpened by time and success. The charcoal gray suit she wore clung to her form like armor, declaring authority without words. But her brown eyes, those that once looked at him with boundless love, now burned with intelligence, anger, and a cold calculation that made James's heart tremble. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," Angela said, her voice smooth as silk but sharp as a knife. The use of Mr. in her greeting was like an arrow, reminding James of the insurmountable distance between them. He wanted to say something, anything, but his throat went dry. He could only stand there, staring at the woman he had once loved, the woman he had abandoned with two newborn children 22 years ago. Behind Angela were two young people who made James's knees nearly buckle. Ethan and Zoe Brooks Carter, the children he had held for only 17 minutes before fleeing like a coward, were now adults, tall and lean. Ethan bore Angela's features with a calm, commanding demeanor. His square jaw reminded James of himself, but his brown eyes held a confidence James had never had at that age. Zoe was a living masterpiece, with James's blue eyes standing out on her light brown skin inherited from her mother. She moved with the grace of a dancer, her soft smile lighting up the room. They were perfect, and they were strangers to him. "Mr. Carter, please feel free to welcome them," Sarah said, breaking the tense silence. James fumbled, trying to regain his voice. "Thank you, everyone, for being here," he began, his voice shaking. "Carter and Comey is honored to welcome the new creative director and these talented interns. I look forward to groundbreaking ideas from you all." He paused, unable to tear his gaze away from Angela. She smiled, but that smile was sharp like a blade. "Let me introduce them," Angela said, stepping forward with the confidence of someone in complete control. "This is Ethan Brooks Carter, strategic intern. He's completing his MBA at Northwestern, specializing in sustainable business practices, and has 3 years of experience teaching financial literacy to youth in underserved communities." Her voice didn't falter, but the name Brooks Carter was like a bullet straight to James's heart. Angela had given their children his last name, a gift he didn't deserve. Ethan stepped forward, extending his hand. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Carter," he said, his voice deep and polite. James took his son's hand, feeling an electric current run through him. Ethan's grip was firm, with calluses hinting at a love for climbing. The simple watch on his wrist spoke of practicality. But Ethan's eyes, as they locked with James's, held a quiet assessment, as if measuring the man before him. James wanted to embrace him and shout that he was his son, but he could only whisper, "The honor is mine." "And this is Zoe Brooks Carter," Angela continued, her voice softening with a mother's pride. "Zoe is completing her master's in creative design at the Chicago School of the Art Institute. Her work has been exhibited at several local galleries, and her thesis project on healing through visual art recently won an award from the Institute. Zoe smiled, stepping forward to shake James's hand. Her smile shattered his heart. It was like Angela's, but with something unique that seemed to turn all the pain into light. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice clear like a melody. James grasped her hand, feeling her lightness yet strength, and almost broke down. "Call me James," he said, trying to steady his voice. Angela immediately interjected, her voice smooth but cold. "I think Mr. Carter prefers to maintain professional boundaries between management and employees. Don't you, Mr. Carter?" The way she emphasized his name was an invisible slap. James could only nod, powerless before her control. "Of course," he replied, his voice hoarse. The meeting continued with presentations and introductions, but James couldn't focus. He watched Angela lead the meeting with absolute confidence. Every gesture, every word calculated to project power. He saw Ethan taking notes with sharp focus, and Zoe sketching something in her notebook, her hand moving as if drawing stories. They were his family, but to them, he was a stranger. He wondered if Angela had told them about him, or if she had created a story that he had died, becoming the heroic father rather than the coward he truly was. When Angela presented the new creative strategy, she emphasized authenticity in marketing, a subtle arrow aimed at James. "Customers want real stories, not empty promises," she said, her gaze sweeping over him. James felt exposed in front of the entire staff. He knew this wasn't accidental. Angela had planned this moment, and she held the upper hand. The meeting concluded, and the staff left the room, chatting eagerly with Ethan and Zoe. James remained, watching Angela pack up the documents with chilling calm. He wanted to say something, wanted to apologize, wanted to explain, but he knew no words could erase 22 years of abandonment. Angela looked up, her gaze cutting through him. "Thank you for the meeting, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice as cold as ice. "I look forward to working here. It will be interesting." She left, leaving James alone in the conference room, his heart pounding with fear and hope. He knew this was just the beginning. Angela Brooks wasn't here to work. She was here to face him, to force him to confront the consequences of his cowardice. And with her were Ethan and Zoe, his children, who he had never deserved to be a father to, but who would now change his life forever. Angela Brooks waited exactly 30 minutes after the orientation meeting had ended. Enough time for James Carter to retreat to his corner office, like a wounded animal seeking shelter. She knew he would sit behind his mahogany desk, trying to process the shock of her appearance and the presence of their children, Ethan and Zoe. She also knew that this moment, the confrontation she had been plotting for 22 years, would be the fire that burned away all of James's illusions of forgiveness. Angela took a deep breath, knocked on Sarah Mitchell's office door, and flashed the smile that had once made her business competitors tremble. "Sarah, I need to speak with Mr. Carter about integrating the new initiatives," she said, her voice smooth yet authoritative. "Is he free?" Sarah nodded, unaware she had just opened the door to a storm. "Of course, Ms. Brooks. He's in his office. I'll let him know." "No need," Angela interrupted, stepping toward the door of James's office. "This is urgent." She pushed open the door, entered, and closed it softly behind her with a click that sounded like the trap being sprung. James stood up suddenly from his desk, his face pale, his hands trembling as they gripped the edge of the desk as if trying to steady himself. He still looked handsome, with his salt and pepper hair and deep blue eyes that had once made Angela fall in love with him when she was just 23. But now, those features were shadowed by the ghost of a man living with regret. "Angela." James breathed her name like a prayer choked on its way out. "You." You look terrific. Angela shut the door, stepping into the room like a warrior, heading into battle. James's office symbolized success. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago, bookshelves lined with awards, but no family photos. Good, she thought. He didn't deserve them. Amazing? Angela repeated, her voice cold as ice. That's what 22 years of raising children alone gets you, James. It either breaks you or makes you invincible. Guess which one I chose? She moved closer, each step a hidden knife. James stepped back, his shoulders sagging under the weight of her gaze. Angela, I know, he began, but she raised her hand, cutting him off like the slash of a blade. She said you don't get to speak, her voice thundering like a storm. You don't get to explain, apologize, or make this your pain. You lost that right when you walked out of Northwestern Memorial Hospital on March 15, 2003, at 3:47 p.m. James's face went ashen. She remembered the exact moment. How could she forget? A mother never forgets the moment the father of her children chooses to abandon them. Angela continued for over 2 decades. Her voice rose like a storm. I'd waited for this moment. 22 years of birthdays you weren't there for. Christmas mornings you skipped. First steps you didn't see. Graduations you missed. 22 years. I've had to be both mother and father to 2 exceptional children. Children who deserved a better father than a coward. James staggered, as if every word was a punch. She wanted him to feel each word, each ounce of pain that she and the children had suffered. Do you want to know what the most challenging part was, James? Angela asked, stepping so close she could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. The eyes Zoe had inherited. It wasn't the sleepless nights, the financial struggles, or the exhaustion that made me feel like I was drowning. The hardest part was explaining to 2 innocent children why their father didn't love them enough to stay. Her voice cracked, but not with sadness. It was fury forged through years of being a black single mother in a prejudiced society. Angela, please, James whispered, but she cut him off with a sharp cry. Please? Did you think of please when you left me alone in that hospital room with 2 newborns? Did you think of please when you ignored my hundreds of calls and tossed away the letters I wrote in tears? Tears now rolled down her cheeks, but they were tears of rage. I called you every day for 2 years, James. With trembling hands, Ethan and Zoe cried for their father every day. Do you know what it feels like to beg the one you love to return to your family? James was crying now, his face breaking apart like a shattered statue. I was scared, he choked out. I didn't know how to be a father. I thought you and the kids would be better off without me. Angela laughed, the sound shattering like glass. Better off? Congratulations, James, because you were right about one thing. We were better off without you. Your absence taught me that I am stronger than I thought. It taught me that I could be everything they needed, even when it seemed impossible. She stood so close now that she could feel his trembling breath. Do you know what I called myself every night in those first 2 years, James? When was I so exhausted I couldn't stand when Ethan and Zoe cried because they were teething when I worked 3 jobs to buy milk, when the looks of contempt from others reminded me I was just a black single mother? James nodded, too afraid to breathe. Mom, Angela said, her voice rising like a battle cry. A single mother. Because their father was too cowardly to share in the most beautiful thing in life. Angela raised her hand before reason could stop her, and a resounding slap cracked through the office. The sound was like thunder, leaving a fiery mark on James's cheek. He staggered, his hand going to his face, tears streaming down. "That's for every Mother's Day I spent alone," Angela said, her voice now rough, raw. "For every night the kids cried for their father. For every time I had to be strong for all three of us, because one of us was too weak to try." James collapsed into the chair, his face the embodiment of collapse. "I'm sorry," he whispered, but Angela shook her head. "Sorry isn't enough, James. Nothing will ever be enough to make up for 22 years of you choosing not to exist in your children's lives." She turned, walking toward the door, her heels clicking on the marble floor like a drum signaling judgment. She said, not looking back, "But here's what you'll learn. I've come here with your abandoned children, and we will work in your space, reminding you every day of what you've lost. Not because I want you back. The woman who loved you died in that hospital room 22 years ago. But because I want you to see what we've become, even without you." She opened the door but paused for a second. "This isn't forgiveness, James. This is justice." The door closed behind her, leaving James slumped in the chair, his face still burning from Angela's slap, his heart shattered by the power of the woman he once loved and the undeniable truth of the consequences of his cowardice. In the days following his confrontation with Angela, James Carter moved through his company like a ghost, haunted by the presence of Ethan and Zoe Brooks Carter. Angela's slap still left an invisible mark on his cheek. Still, the real pain resided in his heart, the realization that the two children he had abandoned were now talented, independent adults who no longer needed him. He knew he had no right to interfere in their lives, but like a thirsty man drawn to a river, James couldn't resist watching them from afar, trying to understand the people he had lost. Ethan worked in the strategy department on the 32nd floor, and James began adjusting his schedule to pass through that area every day. He stood outside the glass-walled conference rooms, pretending to review documents, but his eyes always focused on Ethan. The 22-year-old young man carried Angela's calm demeanor, sharp brown eyes, and a smile that could ease any room. But James also recognized his square jaw in Ethan's face, a genetic trace he didn't deserve to leave behind. Ethan moved with natural confidence, like a born leader. In one meeting, James overheard Linda Morrison, the strategy director, talking to her assistant. "Ethan can see the human impact of business decisions. Yesterday, he asked how our new campaign would affect families in urban areas, not just the numbers. He's 22, and he thinks like a true leader." That compliment was like a knife. James knew that Ethan's depth didn't come from him. It resulted from Angela's resilient nurturing, who had taught their son to view the world through compassion. James remembered the urban neighborhoods of Chicago, where Black communities faced countless challenges. Ethan, volunteering in youth programs, had chosen to help the forgotten ones, a thing James, with all his wealth, had never done. He saw Ethan chatting with an elderly janitor in the company cafeteria, asking about his family and the Cubs with a sincerity that made the older man smile. It was a kindness from a mother who understood the feeling of being excluded. Working in the creative department on the 34th floor, Zoe was an entirely different story, a living masterpiece that James couldn't tear his eyes away from. He spied on her through the glass doors, where she worked in a cluttered creative space. Sketches covering the walls, color swatches arranged in a way only she could understand, small plants in coffee mugs, because traditional pots were too mundane. Zoe moved like an artist, and every gesture was meaningful. When she focused, she would gently bite the end of her pencil, an old habit James recognized from his 20s, and it made his heart ache. In one meeting, James overheard David Chen, the creative director, telling Angela that Zoe doesn't just design. She tells stories. Her sketch for the Johnson account doesn't just sell cars. It tells the story of family memories, trips, roadside tales. She sees emotion in every brand. Standing outside the meeting room with a coffee cup as a cover, James felt a mixture of pride and pain. Zoe had turned the empty spaces of life into art, something Angela surely encouraged. He watched her sketch while listening to the meeting, her lines flowing like water, as if she were drawing the dreams he had destroyed. James began studying Ethan and Zoe's schedules, like a scholar studying a lost civilization. He knew Ethan ate lunch in the company cafeteria, always inviting those who sat alone to join him. He knew Zoe liked to work late, often staying in the office until the lights of Chicago dimmed. He saw them in small moments. Ethan helping a new intern with analysis software. Zoe sharing ideas with colleagues with infectious enthusiasm. They were precious gems shaped by Angela's love and sacrifice, not his DNA. One afternoon, James sat in the executive dining room, looking through the glass at the cafeteria where Ethan and Zoe were eating together. They shared a plate of fries, laughing and communicating with glances as if they had a language only they understood. James realized they weren't just siblings. They were best friends, forged in the fire of his absence. They protected and supported each other, the family he had rejected. With his steady gentleness, Ethan placed a hand on Zoe's shoulder as she told an animated story. With her artist's intuition, Zoe handed Ethan a sketch that made him laugh. They were perfect, and they didn't need him. That truth was a cut to his soul. James had once thought that his absence had protected them from his inadequacy. But looking at Ethan and Zoe, he realized he hadn't just missed their childhood. He had missed the chance to be shaped by their love. He had missed the opportunity to become a better man through fatherhood. Angela had done it all: mother, father, provider, protector, while he built an empire on the foundation of cowardice. He heard Sarah Mitchell say to a colleague, "The Brooks Carter siblings are incredible. They treat everyone, from the CEO to the janitor, with respect. Their mother must be so proud." Their mother, Angela, the woman who had turned suffering into strength, who had raised two remarkable children in a society that often judged her for her skin color and circumstances. James knew Ethan's respect and Zoe's creativity didn't come from him. They resulted from the nights Angela worked late, the times she wiped away her tears to smile at her children, and the resilience she built while facing the contemptuous looks of society. She had created a miracle while he only knew how to escape. James returned to his office, opened the safe, and took out the ultrasound photo. He gently traced the outlines of the two tiny figures as if he could touch the Ethan and Zoe of 22 years ago. He whispered, "Happy birthday, kids. I hope you never know how much I love you. And I hope you never know how cowardly I genuinely am." But those words meant nothing. Without action, love was self-deception, and James had lived with it far too long. He didn't know that Angela was planning for him to face the precious gems he had abandoned, and that the next confrontation would be hers and Ethan's and Zoe's. On a rainy evening in Chicago, Zoe Brooks Carter sat on her mother Angela Brooks's apartment floor, helping her sort through documents for an upcoming business trip. Angela's small office was filled with the smell of old paper and ink, the shelves lined with contracts and notebooks. Zoe, in a baggy sweater, was sorting receipts while chatting with her mother through the bathroom door. "Mom, do you need the 2020 charity receipts?" she called, her voice clear, cutting through the sound of rain tapping against the window. "Yes, sweetie," Angela answered from the bathroom, where she was packing personal items. "It's in the box on the top shelf, labeled Taxes 2020. Zoe stood up on tiptoe to reach the dusty cardboard box. As her fingers grazed the edge of the box, it slipped, causing the lid to come off and spilling a mess of papers onto the hardwood floor. "Oh my God," Zoe muttered, kneeling to pick up the mess. But her hand froze when she touched an old photograph, and the blood in her veins seemed to freeze. The photo had yellowed with age, but the image was clear. A young man with familiar green eyes, just like hers, holding two newborns. His face was a mixture of awe and horror, as though he had just received the most precious yet terrifying gift. Both babies wore hospital bracelets. One marked Baby A, Brooks Carter, and the other Baby B, Brooks Carter. Zoe's heart began to race. She was looking at herself and Ethan, newborns, in the arms of a man who was their father. A man still alive. "Mom!" Zoe whispered, her voice choked. The photo fell from her trembling hands as she dug deeper into the pile of papers. More photos appeared. The man kissing Angela's forehead in the hospital room, awkwardly learning how to change diapers under the nurse's guidance, slumped in a chair next to Angela's bed, still holding her hand. And then, dozens of letters, written in Angela's neat handwriting, were addressed to James Carter at an address Zoe didn't recognize. Angela appeared at the door, her face ashen when she saw Zoe sitting amidst the papers. "Zoe, honey, don't," she began. But Zoe had already picked up one of the letters, her voice growing louder, full of horror. "Dear James," she read, "it's been 2 weeks since you left. Ethan and Zoe are healthy, but they cry for you every night. I know you're scared, but please come home. We can get through this together. I love you. Please don't leave us." The letter was dated April 1st, 2003. Zoe looked up, her eyes filled with pain and betrayal. "Mom, who was James Carter?" "Zoe, let me explain." Angela stepped forward, but Zoe grabbed another letter, her voice shaking. "James, I'm working 3 jobs, but it's not the money that hurts. It's when Ethan and Zoe ask why their dad isn't coming home. Today, Ethan said, 'Baba, I cried for 2 hours because you weren't here to hear it.'" Zoe stopped, tears rolling down her cheeks. "My dad isn't dead, is he, Mom? He's alive." The bathroom door swung open, and Ethan appeared, his hair still damp from the shower, with a concerned look. "What's going on, Zoe? Why?" He stopped when he saw the pile of photos on the floor. Zoe handed him the photo of James holding them as babies, her hand trembling so much the picture shook. "Ethan, look! This is our dad." Ethan took the photo, his face moving from confusion to shock, and then to deep pain. "This is James Carter?" he asked, his voice deep but certain. That wasn't a question. Zoe kept rifling through the letters, her voice growing frantic. "James, it's Christmas today. Ethan and Zoe are almost 10 months old. I bought gifts from Dad because I couldn't bear the thought of them having nothing from you. I wrapped a teddy bear for Ethan and said it was from Dad. Zoe had a music box, and when it played, she stopped crying as if she were looking for you." She paused, choking back tears. "Stop," Ethan whispered. But Zoe couldn't stop. The 22 years of lies were collapsing, and she needed to understand their full extent. Another letter was written 2 years later. "James, it's been 2 years. I'm not calling anymore, not writing anymore. But you should know, Ethan and Zoe are wonderful kids, and every day they grow up without you is a day you lose them forever. I hope your freedom was worth our family." Zoe looked at Angela, her eyes red from anger and pain. "He's alive, Mom. He chose to leave us." Angela knelt next to Zoe, tears falling freely. "Zoe, Ethan, Mom." But Zoe cut her off, her voice breaking into laughter mixed with sobs. 22 years, and you let us believe Dad was dead. We've cried for a man who was too cowardly to be a father." Silently reading another letter, Ethan clenched his hand so tightly that the paper crumpled. "James, today I drove by your company building. Ethan and Zoe are 3 years old. Zoe asked why I was crying. I said I was tired, but the truth is, I saw you on the 45th floor, looking prosperous and happy. I'm glad our abandonment brought you that. Ethan stood up abruptly, his face filled with rage. He's been in Chicago this whole time, living less than 10 miles away, building his empire while we grew up without a father. Zoe grabbed a business magazine article, her voice trembling. Look at this, Ethan. James Carter, CEO of Carter & Company, built a marketing empire based on family values. Family values? While he abandoned us? The irony made Zoe choke. Ethan turned to Angela, his eyes full of anguish. Why, Mom? Why did you say Dad died? All those stories about a heroic father loving us, they were all lies? Angela, her voice choking, replied, Because I loved you too much to let you grow up knowing that your father looked at you when you were born and decided you weren't worth staying for. I wanted you to believe you were loved, even if it was a lie. Zoe screamed, her voice tearing through the air. But we weren't loved. We were abandoned like trash. Ethan started pacing back and forth like a caged animal. Carter & Co. The place we're working. We're working for our dad, who abandoned us, and he knows who we are. Zoe, hyperventilating, clutched her chest. The orientation meeting. The way he looked at us. How he and you looked at each other. They know Ethan. They let us sit there, shaking hands with the man who abandoned us like fools. Zoe read the final letter, written 6 months ago. James, I saw your interview on Forbes about the importance of family. You said children need stability and love. I want you to know that our children have thrived, not because of you, but because I chose to stay. Tomorrow, I will start working at your company. You'll see what you've abandoned. Be ready for the consequences. The apartment fell silent, the only sounds being Zoe's sobs and Ethan's heavy breathing. Why didn't you tell us the truth? Zoe whispered, looking at Angela through her tears. Angela, tears streaming down her face, replied, Because I wanted to protect you from the truth, that your father looked at you when you were born and decided you weren't worth staying for. Ethan, his voice low but sharp, said, But we deserved to know the truth. We deserved to face him. The room was heavy with betrayal and pain. In 20 minutes, Ethan and Zoe's entire world had collapsed, and tomorrow they would have to face the father they once thought was dead. Ethan Brooks Carter couldn't sleep that night. After discovering the truth about his father, James Carter, through his mother's old letters and photographs, he sat in his apartment, staring at the picture of James holding him and Zoe as newborns. James's youthful face in the photo was filled with love and fear, but all Ethan could see was cowardice. Angela's letters, her desperate pleas sent to a man who never responded, were like knives cutting into his heart. By 6 a.m., Ethan had decided that today, James Carter would face his son. Despite James's absence, he put on his best suit, the one Angela had bought for his graduation, to look like the man he had become. Ethan's heart pounded in the elevator up to the 45th floor of Carter & Company, but his hands remained steady. He wasn't here to beg for love or recognition. He was here to force James to look directly at the consequences of 22 years of abandonment. Sarah Mitchell, James's assistant, looked up from her desk with her usual smile. Good morning, Ethan. You're here early. Mr. Carter usually... He's here, Ethan interrupted, his voice low and certain. He had checked the parking lot and seen James's Mercedes in its reserved spot. I need to speak with him. Sarah hesitated. Do you have an appointment? I can... No appointment needed, Ethan said, walking straight toward James's office. This is a family matter. He didn't knock. After 22 years of being denied a father, Ethan no longer cared to ask for permission. James looked up from his desk, his coffee cup halfway to his lips, his face shifting from surprise to recognition and then to fear. He was older than in the photo, with silvering hair and wrinkles around his eyes. But it was undoubtedly James, the man who had held Ethan for 17 minutes before running away. "Ethan," James breathed, setting the coffee cup down with trembling hands. You came here because—" "Stand up," Ethan said, his voice low but sharp as steel. James blinked, taken aback. "What?" I said, standing up. Ethan repeated, his voice full of restrained anger. "Please stand up and look at me. Look at me." James stood slowly, his hands gripping the edge of the desk for balance. He was a few inches taller than Ethan, but looked small in the face of his son's rage. "Do you know who I am?" Ethan asked, his voice cold. James nodded, his eyes reddened. "You're Ethan Brooks Carter. You're—" "My son Ethan," interrupted his voice with a slap. "I'm your son, and for 22 years, I thought you were dead. I mourned a father who chose to be dead to me while you lived less than 10 miles away, building your empire." James's face shattered, but Ethan didn't stop. 22 years of suffering poured out like blood from a mortal wound. "You want me to explain?" James began, but Ethan exploded. "Explain? Explain what? Please explain how you held me, Zoe, as a newborn and then decided we weren't worth staying for. Please explain how you left my mother begging you to come home for 2 years. Ethan pulled a letter from his jacket pocket, his hand shaking with fury. "Look at this," he said, holding the letter before James. "Look at what you did to my mother." James took the letter with trembling hands, his eyes skimming Angela's handwriting. "Dear James," Ethan read aloud, his voice cracking with emotion. "It's been 6 months since you left. Ethan and Zoe are learning how to smile, but their biggest smiles are when they hear the keys in the door. They think their dad is coming home. I can't tell them that their dad chose to leave." James cried, tears rolling down his face, but Ethan didn't feel pity, only fury. "Do you know my mom worked 3 jobs, James? I worked the night shift at a diner, went to school in the morning, and then picked us up from daycare, helping with homework while studying for exams. Do you know my mom slept in the car between shifts because she was too exhausted to drive home?" James shook his head, his shoulders trembling with sobs. "Ethan, I was scared. I didn't know how to be a father. I thought—" "What did you think?" Ethan yelled, his voice echoing through the office. "That abandoning us was better than trying? That we'd be better off without you?" He laughed, the sound as sharp as broken glass. "Congratulations, you were right. We were better off without you because Mom did everything. She's been a mother, father, and protector while you were just a name on a birth certificate." Ethan pulled out the photo of James holding them as babies and held it before him. "Look at my mom!" he shouted. "Look at how she loved you. Look at how happy she was. She was 23, ready to build a family with you. And you looked at us, looked at Mom, and decided we weren't worth trying for." James looked at the photo, his shoulders shaking with sobs. "I was scared," he whispered. "Scared?" Ethan roared. "Do you think Mom wasn't afraid? Are you scared to raise 2 kids alone, go to college, and face the contemptuous looks of being a black single mother?" But she didn't run. She stayed. She fought. Ethan paced back and forth, unable to stand still with his rage. "Do you know what fear is, James? Fear is when Mom checks the bank account and chooses between food and heating. Fear is when Mom explains to 2 6-year-olds why they don't have a father like their friends. Fear is when I saved half my Halloween candy until I was 12 because I thought Dad might return and want to share it with me." James collapsed into the chair, holding his face, making guttural sounds like an animal in pain. "Do you want me to stop?" Ethan asked, his voice dropping but still sharp. You had over 2 decades to stop this by being a father, when you still had time. You had 22 years to be my dad, and chose not to. So no, I won't stop. You will hear everything your abandonment caused. He pulled out another letter, his voice shaking. Today, Zoe asked why her friends have dads who push them on swings, but she doesn't. I told her some dads to go to heaven early, but Zoe asked if her dad loved her enough to stay. How do I tell a 5-year-old that her dad had a choice, and he chose to leave? James made a sound that was no longer crying, but raw pain. Ethan leaned down, his face just inches from James's. Look at me, he commanded. James lifted his eyes, red from tears. This is your son, Ethan said, his voice heavy with judgment. I graduated with honors from Northwestern, speak 3 languages, taught at-risk youth for 3 years, and I'm getting my MBA. I'm everything you could have been proud of, everything you could have shaped, everything you lost when you decided being a father was too hard. James reached out a trembling hand toward Ethan. Ethan, But Ethan stepped back, as if James's touch was poison. Please don't touch me. You lost that right 22 years ago when you left the hospital. I love you, James whispered, his voice breaking. I love you and Zoe more than anything. Ethan laughed, but it wasn't with joy. Love? Do you call abandonment love? Do you call 22 years of absence love? You call building an empire based on family values while abandoning your family love? Ethan turned toward the door but paused, his voice dropping. I want you to know this. We've survived. More than survived. We've thrived. Zoe is the most talented artist I know, and she'll change the world. I'm going to build businesses that help communities grow. We did that with Mom's love and our strength, not because of you. You only gave DNA and abandonment. He opened the door, his final words cutting through the air. Thank you for one thing, James. Thank you for showing me I never want to be a father like you. The door closed behind him, leaving James crumpled in the chair, shattered by the truth his son had just exposed. In the hallway, Ethan leaned against the wall, tears falling for the first time, not for the father he lost, but for the father he never had. After Ethan's confrontation, Zoe Brooks Carter felt her heart squeezed with unbearable tightness. The truth about her father, James Carter, was a fresh wound, sharper than any pain she had ever turned into art. She called in sick on Friday, telling David Chen, the creative director, that she had the flu. But it wasn't the flu. It was the sensation of everything she had known, the story of a heroic father lost, shattering into pieces. She spent the entire day curled up on the sofa at her mother's house, surrounded by old letters and photos, trying to understand why the man who had once held her with loving eyes chose to leave. On Monday, Zoe stood in front of the Carter & Company building at 7 a.m., 2 hours before work started. Over the weekend, she poured her rage into fierce paintings. Abandonment was a shadow drifting away from light. Her mother's love was a golden warrior, and her longing for her father was a human-shaped void, with 2 children reaching nothingness. Painting helped her release some of the anger, but it didn't erase the need for answers. Why weren't she and Ethan enough to make James stay? Zoe entered the creative office, using her employee badge to open the door. Today, she had to present a campaign for the Johnson Automotive account, a project about family trips. Ironic to the point of bitterness, she precisely laid the materials on the conference table, determined not to let James's abandonment affect her excellence. She rehearsed the presentation, her voice clear, but every family word felt like salt in a wound. By 10 a.m., the staff began to trickle in. David Chen appeared, surprised to see Zoe. You're here early, Zoe. Is everything okay?" "All good," she answered, offering a forced smile. "I wanted to make sure everything is perfect for this afternoon." David nodded. "You've got the right emotion for this campaign. Authentic, no cliches. Johnson wants a story about real family connections." Zoe almost laughed at the irony. A connection with family? She only knew a family of 3, always with an empty seat. At 2 p.m., the conference room was packed. Johnson executives, David, and a few account managers sat around the table. Zoe's heart stopped when James Carter walked in, something David said he rarely did for intern presentations. James looked worn out, his eyes dark with fatigue, his suit slightly wrinkled, as if he hadn't slept since his confrontation with Ethan. Zoe saw regret and longing in his gaze when their eyes met across the room, but she forced herself to look away. He was just the CEO, not her father. "Ladies and gentlemen," David began, "I'd like to introduce Zoe Brooks Carter's idea for Johnson's family travel campaign. Zoe is a promising creative talent." Zoe stood up, her hands steady despite the storm inside her. "Thank you for this opportunity," she said, her voice clear. "The Johnson brand is all about connecting families to destinations, people to experiences, and generations to memories." She clicked to the first slide. An illustration of a family loading luggage into a car, children beaming, and parents exchanging loving glances. Zoe continued, her voice growing stronger. "But what makes travel meaningful isn't the destination. It's the journey. It's the songs you sing together, the games in the car, the ice cream stops along the way." She felt James's gaze as though he memorized each of her movements. That should have made her uncomfortable, but instead, it drove her. She wanted him to see how exceptional she was, even without him. She moved to the next slide, an image of a father teaching his daughter to read a map, both laughing at the confusion. "This campaign celebrates how small moments become lasting memories," she said. "It's how families create traditions, their inside jokes, and their unique language of love." James let out a slight sound, almost inaudible, but Zoe noticed. She glanced at him, seeing tears welling in his eyes, struggling to hide them. She continued, her voice growing more confident, talking about how parents and children build trust through shared challenges and how love is shown in staying together. Zoe said that the tagline I propose, switching to the final slide, is "Every mile together is worth it," because it's not about the distance you travel, but who you choose to travel with. The room was momentarily silent, and whispers of approval filled the air. The Johnson representatives nodded enthusiastically. "Excellent, Zoe," the client lead said. "You've captured the genuine emotion of family travel with no fluff or cliché." Zoe should have felt victorious, but only empty, as if she were performing in a play about her own life. When everyone left the room, Zoe stayed behind to gather the materials, her hands beginning to shake as the adrenaline faded. "Zoe," James's voice from behind her, made her freeze. She had hoped he would leave with the others. "Ms. Brooks Carter," she corrected, not turning around. "We don't do first names." James stepped forward, his voice rough. "Your presentation, it was brilliant. Your understanding of family. You have a talent for connecting people." Zoe laughed, the sound broken. "Really? It's funny that I understand family connection when I've never had it." James took a step closer, his face full of pain. "Zoe, please." She turned around, and her professional calm was dissolving. "Please don't call me that. You don't have the right to speak like you know me. You don't have the right to comment on my work or understanding." The pain of 22 years surged up, her chest tightening, her breath growing rapidly. "You abandoned everything," she yelled, her voice breaking. "You abandoned the right to be proud of me, see me grow, and know who I am." She felt her chest tighten, her vision blurring. "You want to know about family connection?" she gasped, panic rising. "I'll tell you about my travel memories. The trips with Mom and Ethan, always with an empty seat in the car and a bed unused in the hotel. Every family picture had a gap where Dad should have stood. Every restaurant asked if we were waiting for someone because 3 people couldn't be a complete family." She cried, her breath erratic, her legs trembling. James instinctively stepped forward, his face filled with concern. "Zoe, you need to sit down. You're panicking. Please don't touch me," she screamed, but her legs buckled. James caught her gently, sitting her down in a chair, his voice soothing. "Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4, and breathe out for 6. You're safe. You'll be okay." Zoe wanted to push him away, to hold on to her anger, but she was sinking into a panic, and his voice, deep, comforting, was the only thing keeping her afloat. He knelt beside her, offering her a glass of water and guiding her breath. As her breath steadied, Zoe realized where she was. In the conference room, comforted by the father she had never known. "Why?" she whispered, not looking at him. "Why wasn't I enough? Why weren't we enough for you to stay?" James inhaled deeply, his voice breaking. "You and Ethan are everything I ever dreamed of, but I was too weak to believe I deserved to be a father. Leaving wasn't because you weren't enough. I was too cowardly to try." Zoe shook her head, tears falling. "That's not an answer. It's just a way of saying we weren't worth fighting for." "Exactly," James said, his voice simple. "No answer could justify abandoning you, Ethan, and your mother. I don't expect you to forgive me." Zoe stood up, regaining some composure. "I have to go." James nodded, stepping back. "Will you be okay?" "I've been getting myself home for 22 years, she said, her voice cold. "I can manage." She walked to the door but stopped, turning back. "James, the family travel presentation? I made it all up. I don't know what it feels like because I've never had a father to make those memories." She left, leaving James with the truth that his daughter was talented, beautiful, and broken, in ways entirely his fault. But in those 17 minutes, Zoe had allowed him to help her. A small crack in the wall between them. James clung to it like a drowning man grabbing at a life raft. Angela Brooks stood by the window of her office on the 36th floor of Carter & Company, gazing down at the courtyard where James Carter sat alone on a wooden bench, eating lunch under the faint Chicago sun. Since Ethan's confrontation and Zoe's panic attack, James had changed. He no longer dined in the executive cafeteria, seemingly punishing himself by abandoning the comforts of his position. He looked smaller, his shoulders hunched under the weight of the past. Angela had once thought witnessing his collapse would satisfy her, but now she only felt a strange emptiness. Her plan for revenge, which had been carefully crafted over 22 years, wasn't going as she had imagined. She had envisioned James begging for forgiveness or denying his responsibility so that she could unleash her fury with justification. But instead, he accepted every accusation. No defense, no resistance. Moreover, she began to notice his quiet actions, small efforts to support Ethan and Zoe without seeking recognition. Angela felt torn. Her anger still burned, but a part of her, the part that had once loved James deeply, was faltering. "You're looking at him again." Sarah Mitchell, James's assistant, entered with a stack of documents, her voice gentle yet sharp. Angela turned around, putting on her professional mask. "I'm just observing the company's moves, Sarah. Understanding how leadership operates," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. Sarah raised an eyebrow, setting the documents down on the desk. "Angela, I've worked with you on joint projects for 5 years. I've never seen you so interested in leadership moves." What's going on? Angela hesitated. Sarah was trustworthy, always discreet, and sharp when reading people. But this situation was far too complicated, woven with love, betrayal, and 22 years of pain. She sighed and sat down in her chair. James and I have a history, she said, choosing her words carefully. A history of what kind? Sarah tilted her head, intrigued. Angela met Sarah's gaze directly, her voice low. A history that created 2 wonderful children and 22 years of regret. Sarah sat down, her eyes widening as she processed the information. Ethan and Zoe are Mr. Carter's children? Angela nodded, her eyes distant. His children, but he abandoned them right after they were born. I'm here because I want him to see the consequences of his cowardice and what he's thrown away. Sarah fell silent, processing the information. And now? How do you feel now that the plan is unfolding? Angela looked out the window, where James was feeding a sandwich to some pigeons. I'm not sure, she admitted. I thought this would heal the wounds, but now I wonder if I'm spreading the pain. Sarah leaned forward. I don't know the whole story, but I've seen how Mr. Carter has changed since you and the kids arrived. He's been working later, laughing less, and trying in his way. Angela frowned. She had noticed the signs. Last week, Ethan mentioned that the inner-city youth program he was involved in received a large grant from a fund connected to Carter and Confronting, but no one acknowledged it was James's doing. Zoe had also discovered that some of her paintings had been bought at a high price through an anonymous auction, and the buyer clearly understood her art. Angela suspected James was behind it, but he never asked for recognition. If he's trying, she said sharply, it's 22 years too late. Sarah nodded. Maybe. But sometimes, trying late is better than never trying at all. Did Ethan and Zoe will notice? Angela sighed. They notice, and that's what scares me. They're angry with him, but I see the curiosity in their eyes, the longing for a father they never had. I don't want them to be hurt anymore. Sarah placed a hand on Angela's. You've raised them to be strong. They'll find their way to face him, just like you did. The conversation with Sarah left Angela deep in thought. She remembered the early days of being a single black mother in Chicago, facing judgment from coworkers, neighbors, and even her children's teachers. She had learned to stand tall, turning scorn into motivation for success. But now, she wondered if her anger toward James prevented her from seeing another side of him, not the cowardly 23-year-old, but the man trying to atone. During a strategy meeting that week, Angela and James worked together, discussing the Morrison account. Their current strategy lacks authenticity, Angela said, her tone professional. We need to tell real stories, not idealized images. James nodded, his eyes lighting up with rare empathy. You're right. The way you approach things, focusing more on people than numbers, is precisely what this industry needs. It's excellent. Angela felt a familiar flicker of pride from when they were students, when James always understood her vision. You always have great ideas, Angela, he said softly, and she almost smiled sincerely at that moment, but she quickly masked it. Don't make this personal, James, she said coldly. James looked down, nodding. I know. I want you to know I see what you've built. His words were sincere, but Angela wasn't ready to let them into her heart. Yet these moments were becoming more frequent. Glances, words that hinted at the love they had once shared. She hated herself for feeling conflicted, but she couldn't deny that James was changing. One afternoon, Angela discovered an email from Carter & Company's charity fund confirming a donation for the Black Community Arts program that Zoe had been involved in. It didn't say James's name, but she knew it was him. She also heard Ethan mention a new laptop accidentally appearing on his desk after complaining about his old one being broken. These quiet actions, unacknowledged, without any recognition expectation, confused Angela. James wasn't trying to bribe them. He was trying to do what was right, even if it was too late. This is subtle revenge, Angela told herself. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like watching someone she once loved try to take back what he had willingly abandoned. She stood by the window, watching James get up from the bench, his wrinkled suit, walking into the building with the gait of a man carrying a weight no one could see. Angela wondered if she was fighting the past or fighting herself. Sarah walked in, bringing coffee. "Are you okay?" she asked. Angela nodded, but her voice was heavy. "I don't know, Sarah. I don't know what I want anymore." She didn't know that in the days to come, her journey of revenge would become different, a journey of forgiveness, healing, and the possibility of loving again, even if just a little, the man who had shattered her heart 22 years ago. The converted warehouse turned art gallery in Chicago's vibrant arts district was alive with light and laughter. Zoe Brooks Carter's first exhibition, The Void and a Whole Heart, attracted a crowd of artists, collectors, and critics. The rough brick walls were adorned with Zoe's paintings, each telling a story of loss, love, and resilience. Zoe, dressed in an elegant black dress, moved through the crowd, answering questions with a bright smile. But her eyes kept scanning the room, searching for a face she hoped and feared would appear. Angela Brooks stood near the largest painting, a masterpiece titled Father's Space, chatting with guests with the pride of a mother. She looked regal in a dark dress that highlighted her commanding presence. Ethan stood beside her, explaining to a collector how Zoe used space and light to transform absence into a powerful presence. "My sister has always been good at finding beauty in what's broken," Ethan said, his voice full of pride. But he, too, glanced toward the door, like Zoe, carrying a sense of tense anticipation. Zoe should have felt victorious. 3 paintings had sold, critics whispered about a new star, and several galleries had expressed interest in collaborating. But her mind was distracted by thoughts of James Carter. Would he come? Would he dare face the artwork that reflected the pain he caused? She wasn't sure if she wanted him to appear or disappear forever. At exactly 8:30 p.m., when Zoe had begun to think James wouldn't show up, Angela suddenly stopped near the entrance. Zoe followed her mother's gaze and felt her heart stop. James Carter stood in the doorway, looking out of place among the art crowd. He wore a simple suit, not the expensive suits he typically wore, as though he were deliberately trying to make himself smaller. In his hand was a small gift, wrapped carefully, and his eyes scanned the room with the anxiety of someone unsure if they belonged. James approached Angela, his steps slow, as though afraid to shatter the fragile atmosphere. "I wasn't sure I should come," he said quietly, his voice full of sincerity. "But I couldn't miss Zoe's first exhibition." Angela looked at him, her gaze a mix of surprise and caution. "How did you know?" she asked, her voice not quite accusatory. Ethan glanced over, aware of the exchange but not intervening. James smiled sadly. "Ethan mentioned it in a meeting. He didn't invite me, but his pride. I had to come." Angela hesitated, then said, "You should see these paintings. But I warn you, James, they speak about absence, about an incomplete family. It might be hard for you." James nodded, his eyes filled with resolve. "I understand. I want to see what Zoe has created." Angela led him inside, keeping her distance, but not sending him away. Standing near a painting, Zoe pretended to converse with a guest, but her ears were tuned to their conversation. The first painting James stopped at was Waiting Room, an image of a hospital with 2 empty chairs and a woman holding 2 children, her face full of hope mixed with despair. The details were realistic, but the emotion was brutal, inspired by the day James had left the hospital. He stood before the painting, tears rolling down his face, unaware of the people around him. Zoe walked over, her heart racing. "You came," she said quietly, not looking directly at him. "I hoped it would be okay," James responded, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I have no right to be here, but—" "You don't," Zoe agreed, but her voice softened more than she intended. "But I'm glad you came." They stood together before the waiting room, father and daughter, facing the pain he had left behind. "It's beautiful," James said. "It's harsh but lovely. You've turned our pain into something meaningful." Zoe nodded. "Art is how I deal with the things I don't understand. I've been painting about my father's absence my whole life without even knowing it." They moved through the exhibition, an odd procession between the artist and the absent father. Mother Warrior depicted Angela as a fierce protector, holding Ethan and Zoe in golden light while she stood in the shadows, sacrificing her brilliance to keep them illuminated. "This is how you see your mother," James observed. Zoe corrected him. "This is who my mother truly is. She gave up parts of herself so we could be whole." In front of empty Christmas chair, a festive dining table with 3 seats and 1 empty, James paused, tears once again filling his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered, not caring who heard. "I'm sorry for everything." Zoe looked at him, her heart torn. "I know," she said. "I see you trying. The paintings being bought, the software, Ethan's visa for Sophia. You think we don't know, but we do." James was surprised. "I didn't want recognition." "I know," Zoe replied. "That's why it matters." Ethan appeared beside them, sensing the importance of the moment. "You came," he said, his tone neutral, but not hostile. "Zoe's work is outstanding," James replied. "You both have exceeded anything I could have imagined." Ethan nodded, not smiling. "We succeeded despite you, not because of you." James nodded, accepting the statement. "That makes it even more remarkable." They stood before the centerpiece painting, the void and a whole heart, a family of 3 in golden light. But their shadows evoked a 4th figure, the missing father, present as an absence that highlighted the family's love. "This one isn't for sale," Zoe said quietly. "Why?" James asked. She looked directly at him, because the story wasn't over. James swallowed hard, his eyes flashing with fragile hope. As the exhibition drew to a close, Zoe opened the gift from James, a vintage art kit with expensive brushes and professional paints. James said these belonged to my mother. She used to paint, but my family stopped her because it wasn't a woman's work. I kept them, not knowing why, but now I understand. They're for you. My mother would be proud to see them used by a true artist. Zoe touched the brush, feeling an unexpected connection with the grandmother she had never known. "Thank you," she said. "I'll cherish them." James walked behind Angela, Ethan, and Zoe as they left the gallery, not demanding the spotlight. Zoe turned back, her voice soft. "James, thank you for coming. It means something to me that you saw my work." "Thank you for letting me stay," James replied. "Seeing you shine is one of the most beautiful moments of my life." Angela looked at him, her gaze softening, but she said nothing. They parted outside on the sidewalk, not a family, but 4 people connected by blood, history, and a fragile hope for healing. Late on Tuesday night, as Chicago was blanketed in its first snowfall of the season, James Carter sat in his office on the 45th floor, working late as he had been since Zoe's exhibition. It wasn't because of urgent work, but because going home meant facing the emptiness and the fragile hope of the family he had abandoned. His phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m., the screen displaying Angela Brooks' number. His heart skipped, thinking it was a rare call. But when he answered, Angela's sobs shattered every illusion he had. "James," she choked, her voice broken in a way he had never heard before. "You have to come right now. Zoe, oh God, Zoe's been in an accident." Her words were like a knife, freezing James's blood. "Accident? What?" "In a car accident," Angela cried. "She's badly hurt. Northwestern Memorial Hospital. You have to come." The phone slipped from James's hand, but he was already running to the door, grabbing his coat and keys, his mind consumed by primal fear. Zoe, his daughter, the talented artist who turned pain into light, was fighting for her life. The drive to the hospital was a nightmare, the fog thick and the snow plastering the windshield. James prayed, something he hadn't done in decades, willing his life away for Zoe's safety. Northwestern Memorial Hospital, the very place he had abandoned Angela and the kids 22 years ago, loomed like a ghost from the past. He rushed through the emergency room doors, eyes scanning the waiting area. Angela sat on a plastic chair, her business suit crumpled and stained with Zoe's blood. Her face was tear-streaked, her hands trembling as she held the phone, its incessant ringing filling the air. Ethan paced behind her, his shirt torn, a cut on his forehead, as if he had been at the scene of the accident. "Angela!" James called, rushing to her. When she looked up, her face crumbled. "James!" she sobbed, and then collapsed into his arms, shattered. "Zoe's been in surgery for 4 hours. They haven't said anything. There's too much blood." James held her tight, tears streaming down his face, as he felt the pain of the woman he had once loved and hurt. "I'm here," he whispered into her hair. "I'm not going anywhere. We'll face this together." Ethan stopped pacing, looking at James with eyes filled with grown-up pain. "She had just left the library," he said, his voice hollow. 20 minutes ago she called me, laughing about something silly. She was happy, James." James hugged Ethan, holding both Angela and his son, feeling them break in his arms. In this cold waiting room, the barriers between them crumbled. "Zoe is strong," James said with certainty. "She's Angela's daughter. She's a warrior." The hours dragged on endlessly. The waiting room slowly emptied, but the Brooks-Carter family stood guard for Zoe. James didn't leave Angela's side. When she needed coffee, he got it. When she called Zoe's friends, he held the phone while she cried. He did what he should have done 22 years ago. At 6 a.m., Dr. Sarah Chen emerged from the surgery area, her face tired, but not desperate. "The surgery was successful," she said. Angela crumpled to the ground, and James caught her. "Zoe's injuries were severe, but we've repaired the damage. She's stable but still unconscious. The family can visit." James was about to step back, feeling unworthy, but Angela grabbed his hand tightly. "Your family," she said, her gaze firm. "You're her father. You belong here." The ICU was filled with machines and the beep of monitors. Zoe lay on the bed, small amid the wires and tubes, her face bruised and swollen. James approached as if entering a sacred place, afraid his breath might disturb her fragile life. He knelt by her bed, gently holding her hand. "I'm here, my love," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." 3 days passed, and James didn't leave the hospital. Angela and Ethan took turns sleeping on chairs, but James stayed, holding Zoe's hand, telling her stories he had never had the chance to share, about his dream of being a father, his regret, and the love he had kept for 22 years. On Thursday morning, the weak sunlight filtered through the ICU windows, and Zoe began to stir. She opened her eyes, her gaze cloudy as she searched for something. James's face was the first thing she saw, weary but shining with salvation. "Don't speak," he said gently, offering her ice chips. "You're at the hospital, sweetheart. You've been in an accident, but you'll be okay." Zoe's eyes scanned the room, stopping on Angela and Ethan by her bedside. Then she looked back at James, her voice weak. "Dad." The entire room held its breath. James choked back his tears. For 22 years, he had dreamed of hearing those words, but never believed he was worthy. "I'm here, my love," he cried, kissing her hand. "I'm not going anywhere, I promise." Zoe smiled weakly, her eyes full of tears, not from pain, but from realization. "I love you, Dad," she whispered, and those words healed a deep wound in James's heart. Angela cried, holding Ethan, witnessing the beginning of rebuilding between her daughter and the man she once loved. Ethan held Zoe's hand, his voice thick with emotion. "We're all here, Zoe. Together." Zoe looked at her family, not perfect, scarred, but for the first time, whole, and whispered, "Together." She reached out, weakly pulling Angela and James's hands closer. A small gesture, but one with the power to heal. In the sterile scent of antiseptic in the hospital room, a family that had been broken 22 years ago began to heal, not through flowery words, but through simple actions, choosing to stay, fight, and love despite the wounds. James held Angela and Zoe's hands, looking at Ethan through tears. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for letting me come home." Zoe smiled, her voice weak but sure. "Welcome home, Dad." 3 weeks after Zoe's accident, the early winter sunlight filtered through the windows of Angela Brooks' apartment in Chicago, illuminating the dining table set for 4. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and toast mingled with Zoe's light laughter as she debated an old song with Ethan. Angela stood in the kitchen, stirring the soup she had made for her children's favorite meal. But her gaze occasionally drifted to the empty chair at the end of the table, the chair reserved for James Carter. Today was the first time all 4 would sit down for dinner together, a small but meaningful step in their journey of family reconciliation. Zoe, though still weak, had made a significant recovery. The scar on her forehead reminded her of the accident, but her smile was brighter than ever. She had called James Dad in the hospital, a word that broke down the wall of 22 years between them. But forgiveness hadn't come easily. Sitting across from her, Ethan kept his distance from James, though his anger had softened. Angela, in a simple sweater, felt her heart torn between the painful past and the newfound hope. She had once thought that revenge was the answer, but now she realized that love, even imperfect, held greater power. James arrived on time, holding a bottle of wine and a small bouquet for Angela. He wore a simple shirt, not the business suit he was known for, as though trying to shed the image of the CEO to become a father, a man who was trying. "Thank you for inviting me," he said quietly as he handed Angela the flowers. She smiled, a genuine smile, though still reserved. "Thank you for coming, James." Zoe stood up and hugged him gently, her green eyes, just like his, glowing with a newfound acceptance. Ethan nodded, not hugging, but his gaze was no longer as cold as before. Dinner began with awkwardness. James talked about a new project at Carter & Company, but quickly shifted to ask Zoe about her next exhibition. Zoe said, "I'm working on a new collection," her voice bright about reclaiming lost pieces. "It started with my grandmother's paintbrushes." James smiled, his eyes filling with tears. "My mother would have loved that. She always wanted to paint. But my family—" He stopped, his gaze distant. Angela knew he was thinking about the pressures that had made him abandon her, the family's prejudices, the societal judgment of a white man loving a black woman. Ethan, usually quiet, spoke up. "He said you came to my MBA graduation last week," his voice low, "sitting in the back row, just like I asked. You didn't make Mom cry, so you kept your word." James nodded. "I just wanted to see you shine, Ethan. I don't have the right to ask for anything more." Angela looked at the two men in her life and realized that Ethan was trying to open up, if only a little. She remembered the small actions of James recently. Funding the community program Ethan worked with, buying tickets for Zoe to attend an art workshop, and even sending a mechanic when her car broke down. He never asked for recognition, but she could see the sincerity. Sarah Mitchell, James's assistant, once told Angela during a coffee break that Mr. Carter has changed since you and the kids arrived. He's no longer the man who only cared about work. He's learning to put family before fear. Angela had dismissed it then, but now she wasn't so sure. James hadn't asked for forgiveness directly. He proved it through actions. When Angela mentioned the difficulty of finding a caregiver for a sick black neighbor's child, James silently arranged for a professional service without her knowing. Small gestures like these made her falter, reminding her of the 23-year-old who had once looked at her like she was his whole world. At dinner, Zoe spoke about a new painting inspired by black families overcoming hardships. She said, "I want to tell our story," looking at Angela, Ethan, and then James. Not just about the void, but how we fill it. James bowed his head, his voice hoarse. "I don't deserve to be part of that story, Zoe." She shook her head. "You are a part of it, even if you don't want to be. Your absence shaped us, but now you're here, which changes the story." Ethan, still cautious, added, "I haven't forgiven you, James. But I see you trying. As long as you don't hurt Mom or Zoe again, I'll give you a chance to prove yourself." James nodded, his eyes red. "Thank you, Ethan. I can't promise to be perfect, but I promise I won't leave again." Angela watched them, feeling an old wound begin to heal, though it still ached. Dinner ended with laughter, as Zoe told a funny story from her childhood when she and Ethan tried to bake for Angela and nearly set the kitchen on fire. James listened, laughing, but his eyes were longing. He had missed those moments. As they cleared the table, Angela stood next to James at the sink, their hands touching as they passed dishes. "You did well today," she said quietly. James looked at her, his gaze soft like it used to be. "I want to deserve this chance, Angela." They said their goodbyes outside. James hugged Zoe, nodded to Ethan, and looked at Angela with unspoken sincerity. "Next week, I'll cook," she said, her voice light if you want. James smiled a genuine smile. "I'd love that." As Angela drove Ethan and Zoe home, she felt a fragile peace settle over her. From the back seat, Ethan said, "He's trying, Mom. I don't know if I'll forgive him yet, but I see him trying." Zoe squeezed her mother's hand. "We're a family, Mom. Not perfect, but it's ours." In the empty apartment, James sat, staring at the bouquet Angela had left on his desk. He thought about the years Angela had raised Ethan and Zoe alone, facing societal prejudice as a black single mother. He thought about Zoe calling him Dad, Ethan's nod, and Angela's soft gaze. Their love had triumphed, not by erasing the past, but by building a future from the broken pieces. He didn't deserve it, but would spend the rest of his life trying. Chicago continued its rhythm outside. The commuters, the children attending school, the families creating simple memories. But in this small apartment, 4 people, once strangers, were learning how to become a family, step by step, moment by moment, healing the scars of 22 years.